Ciao ragazzi, this is Talk Calcio TV on YouTube. Buonasera a tutti, welcome to this episode where we preview the big clash in the Champions League tomorrow night. That is Italian reigning champions Juventus taking on last year's runners-up in the Premier League, Tottenham Hotspur. Now, I said at the time when the Champions League draw was made back in December, in fact it was the week we set up this channel, doesn't time fly? I said at the time, ignore Real Madrid versus Paris Saint-Germain. For me, Juventus versus Spurs was the tie of the round. You know, it's the tie which on paper I can't predict the winner. I'm sure many won't. I'm sure if you support Spurs you're confident they'll win, and likewise if you're a Bianconeri fan. I think this game is the one that is really going to capture the imagination of the whole of fans worldwide, even if you're neutral like myself. My English team is Nottingham Forest, by the way, so we're not in this competition, as you can tell. So we're going to go through the teams on both of them, our research on Spurs, of course, where we think the game will be won and lost, and my own personal prediction. So that's going to be coming straight up. So we start with, of course, Juventus, the reigning champions of Serie A. Of course, last year they made the Champions League final in Cardiff against Real Madrid, where we know they saved their worst till last, of course, as they capitulated in the final 4-1, inspired by Cristiano Ronaldo on the day. This year they'll be wanting to go one better. Spurs, on the other hand, of course, came second in the Premier League last year. They were knocked out in the Champions League in the group stage last year. This year they actually survived or even topped a group of death. You know, they had Borussia Dortmund and Real Madrid. They even went to the Bernabeu, drew. They even beat Real Madrid at Wembley. You know, and there's some people saying that Spurs aren't the team as they were last year. Right now, I think the football they're playing in Europe, they're definitely a team to be feared, and I don't think Juventus would have come across a team like this in a while. So, we're going to start with both sides' key men then. For Juventus right now, you're going to have to say it's Gonzalo Higuain. 36 goals in all competitions this year, 14 in the league. Of course, he was on the score sheet the other night again against Fiorentina. And Spurs' main striker, need I say any more, Harry Kane. Of course, just a week ago or so, he scored his 100th Premier League goal. He was on the score sheet again at the weekend, once again against Arsenal in the big North London derby, the only goal of the game. You know, on paper right now, you know, you can compare obviously Higuain being older of the two. Harry Kane right now, I think, he is the informed striker in European football. His goals tally speaks for itself. You know, I just think in this game it's going to be interesting because although we know Juventus's back line, of course, the experience of Chiellini, Buffon, Lichtsteiner, Barzagli, even Alessandro at the back as well as Benascia, we know how they are a tight, solid unit at Juventus, how they keep the clean sheets. You know, I don't think Harry Kane, they will have come across a striker like Harry Kane. Of course, we do have some good strikers in Serie A, as we know, but I think given the pace, his strength, his physical presence, this will be a test for Juventus's back line. It will be interesting to see how they deal with it. Other news, as we know, is that it's likely that, we mentioned it last week, in fact, Argentine Paulo Dybala is likely to be out of this game. So I'm sure if you're a Spurs fan, you see that Dybala's missing, you'll be happy, obviously. Of course, without him, you know, he is that man that can sort of link the play. He can score, as we know. He can link that play between him and Gonzalo Higuain, his fellow Argentine. The other night against Fiorentina, Mandzukic played in a playmaker role, and I don't think it quite had the same effect. Of course, it was goals from Higuain and Bernardeschi that settled the score at the Artemio Franchi in Florence the other night. We look at Spurs then, of course, we've already mentioned about how good Harry Kane was, of course. But also another thing that's interesting with Spurs is they have the players that can link the play to Kane up front and even going forward. You know, even if Juventus, I'm sure they'll try and man-mark Harry Kane. You also look at the likes of Dele Alli, Christian Eriksen, even Song, the Korean. You know, the speed, the balls, the crossing, that is going to possess a massive test for Juventus's backline. And let's be honest, right now, although Spurs aren't top of the Premier League, there isn't a team like in Serie A that can play football like Spurs do. So, we look at the two teams' forms coming into this fixture tomorrow night in Turin. Juventus, as we know, have won 6 straight wins in Serie A. They've not always been at their best. Of course, they beat Genoa 1-0 at home. They weren't convincing. They then hammered Sassuolo 7-0 the following week. And even on Friday night, they weren't at their best against Fiorentina, but they know how to get a win in Serie A. That's how they've won the Scudetto the last 5-6 times now. You know, Juventus don't have to be at their best to get a result. We look at then in the Spurs camp, they come into this game having taken 7 points out of 3 tricky ties in the Premier League. You know, they've beaten Manchester United, they drew away at Liverpool. I'm sure you'll watch that game like I did. And then, of course, at the weekend, they won their big one, the North London derby against their biggest rivals, our local rivals, Arsenal. So they come into this game with the bragging rights of North London. But we also look in the Champions League this year, as mentioned already, they haven't lost. You know, of course, Juventus were in a group with Barcelona, which they finished second to. In terms of the style of play, you know, Juventus, of course, Paulo Dybala missing. I'm sure Spurs fans will look at that and they will see it as a plus. I mentioned already how I don't think Mandzukic is a playmaker. His physical presence will no doubt give the likes of Kieran Trippier trouble, no doubt, and he'll have an advantage over Trippier. But you know, he's not a playmaker. You know, in my opinion, if they're going to go at Spurs tomorrow night, Juventus, they really have to get the ball out wide to the likes of Bernardeschi and really try and create something. Of course, we know the likes of Alessandro, they like to come forward, as well as Benascia. No doubt Juventus, they'll be man-marking Harry Kane. I'm sure Chiellini or Lichtstein will be tussling all game. You can see it, the like-for-like in physical stature as well. I do think, though, I mean, even should Juventus man-mark Harry Kane, it's then how do they stop the supply from Christian Eriksen, even Dele Alli? You know, it's not a case of just marking out Kane. We know how Spurs are quick on the counter-attack. We've seen it last season and this season in the Premier League. It's fair to say there is no team in Serie A that plays at a fast pace like Spurs do in the Premier League. You know, Serie A isn't like that. This is where it's an advantage if you're a Spurs fan here. You know, with the pace they've got, they're going to attack Juventus. Now, Juventus, you know, if they're going to try and sit back against Spurs, it will backfire on them. Juventus have to really go out tomorrow night and make a statement at home, you know. I mean, if they got a 1-0 win, Juventus tomorrow, that, in my opinion, is not going to be enough going to Wembley. Okay, it might be good if they can afford to play tactic, but, you know, the style of catenaccio doesn't work anymore in European football, especially against English clubs. It probably did in the 90s and the noughties and even the 80s and 70s, but it doesn't work now, in my opinion. We look at Spurs then. Let's have a look at them. Now, my only weakness, I think, which Juventus will be looking to exploit, has been Spurs' defence hasn't been as good, in my opinion, as last year. The goalie himself, Hugo Lloris, hasn't been himself this year. We've seen him make some howlers. He did play well at the weekend, of course, against Arsenal, where it mattered, no doubt. He's still a world-class goalie. You know, he is the French national captain. One thing I say about both managers is, you know, will they be at their clubs next year? There has been talk, should Juventus not win Serie A or even the Champions League, Massimo Allegri might be shown the door. There's been talk of, I don't know who Juventus would get to replace him. It's fair to say, you know, whenever they failed in Europe or lost 2 finals, he's always been seen as an ex-Milan manager, which it's like some Juventus fans never accept Allegri. But for me, I think he really has to win the Champions League or Serie A. If neither of those competitions are won, I think that might spell the end for him. We look at Maurizio Pochettino now. I'm sure all the papers in England every week he's linked with every job because he's doing such a fantastic job at Spurs. You know, it's the best football they've been playing in years. There's been talk about Real Madrid wanting to replace Zinedine Zidane, of course, played for Juventus as well at one stage in his career. He's linked with so many jobs. Understandably, he's a man in demand. You know, of course, Paris Saint-Germain, who he used to play for, that's another one that his name's been linked with. You know, I think Spurs would need to keep Pochettino to keep the team together, those players, the nucleus they've got. So it's, you know, it's interesting. So tomorrow's game could have a bearing on what happens to the managers next season in the future, no doubt. So thanks for watching that episode as we gave you our big build-up to Juventus versus Spurs tomorrow night. I'm excited. I can't wait. I said it's the tie of the round. I'm looking forward to the game. Tell us what you think. Like, comment below. Who will win? Will it be Juventus? Will it be Spurs? Who is the main man? Who is the better striker? Is it Higuain or is it Harry Kane? Tell us what you think. Don't forget to subscribe. Talk Calcio TV on YouTube. And we will have our reaction to this match on our next episode. Arrivederci.